7 p.m. Halfway through dinner, Sherry's cell phone rang. I'm just going to let it go to voicemail, she thought. There's precious little time for us to be together as a family anymore. Then, as if on cue, another familiar thought struck her. It might be someone who needs me. As always, Sherry listened to the second voice in her head and jumped up from the table to answer the phone. Her heart sank when she saw the name on caller ID. Well, I am already up from the table, she reasoned. I may as well get this over with. Hope I'm not disturbing anything, said Phyllis Renfro, the women's ministry leader at church. Certainly you aren't disturbing anything, Sherry lied. Sherry, I'm in deep water, Phyllis said. Margie was going to be our activities coordinator at the retreat, and now she's canceled. Something about priorities at home. Anyhow, you can pitch in? The retreat, Sherry had almost forgotten that the annual women's retreat was this weekend. She had actually been looking forward to leaving the kids and Walt behind and strolling around the beautiful mountainous area for 2 days, just herself and the Lord. In fact, the possibility of solitude felt better to her than the planned group activities. Taking on Margie's activities coordinator position would mean giving up her precious alone time. No, it wouldn't work, Sherry would just have to say. Automatically, the second thought pattern intervened. What a privilege to serve God and these women. Sherry, by giving up a little portion of your life, by letting go of your selfishness, you can make a big difference in some lives. Think it over. Sherry didn't have to think it over. She had learned to respond unquestioningly to this familiar voice, just as she responded to her mother's and Phyllis's and maybe God's too. Whoever it belonged to, this voice was too strong to be ignored. Habit won out. I'll be happy to help, Sherry told Phyllis. Just send me whatever Margie's done and I'll get working on it. Phyllis sighed, audibly revealed, Sherry, I know it's a sacrifice. Myself, I'd have to do it several times every day. But that's the abundant Christian life, isn't it? Being living sacrifices. If you say so, thought Sherry, but she couldn't help wondering when the abundant part would come in. 7:45 p.m. Dinner finally finished, Sherry watched Walt position himself in front of the TV for the football game. Todd picked up his Xbox and headphones and disappeared into a video game, while Amy slipped away quietly to her room. The dishes stayed on the table. The family hadn't quite gotten the hang of helping clean up yet. But maybe the kids were still a little young for that. Sherry cleared the dishes from the table on her own. 11:30 p.m. Years ago, Sherry could have cleaned up after dinner, gotten the kids to bed on time, and finished editing Jeff's report with ease. A cup of coffee after dinner and the adrenaline rush that accompanied crisis and deadline galvanized Sherry into superhuman feats of productivity. She wasn't called Super Sherry for nothing. But it was becoming noticeably harder these days. Sherry didn't work like it used to. More and more, she was having trouble concentrating, forgetting dates and deadlines, and not even caring a great deal about it all. At any rate, by sheer willpower, she had completed most of her tasks. Maybe her edits on Jeff's report had suffered a little in quality, but she felt too respectful to be resentful to feel bad. But I did say yes to Jeff, Sherry thought. It's not his fault, it's mine. Why couldn't I tell him how unfair it was for him to lay this on me? No time for that now. She had to get on with her real task for the evening, her talk with Walt. Her and Walt's courtship and early marriage had been pleasant. They were in love and they were good partners. Where she had been uncertain, Walt had been decisive. Where he had been pessimistic, she had been hopeful. When she noticed Walt's lack of emotional connectedness, she naturally took it upon herself to try and provide the warmth and love and relationship lacked. God has put together a good team, she would tell herself. We both bring different strengths to our marriage. Walt has a lot of wisdom and I have a lot of love. This would help her get over the lonely times when he couldn't seem to understand her hurt feelings. But over the years, Sherry noticed a shift in the relationship. It started off subtly, then became more pronounced. She could hear it in his sarcastic tone when she had a complaint. She saw it in the lack of respect in his eyes when she tried to tell him about her need for more support from him. She felt it in his increasingly insistent demand for her to do something his way, to do things his way. And his temper, maybe it was job stress or having kids, whatever it was, Sherry never dreamed she'd ever hear the cutting, angry words she heard from the lips of the man she'd married. She didn't have to cross him much at all to be subjected to the anger. Clutter on the counter, a checking overdraft, or forgetting to gas up the car, any of these seemed to be enough. It all pointed to one conclusion: the marriage was no longer a team. If it ever had been one, it was a parent-child relationship with Sherry on the wrong end. At first she thought she was imagining things. There I go again, looking for trouble when I have a great life, she told herself. What would help for a while until Walt's next temper attack. Then her hurt and sadness would tell her the truth her mind wasn't willing to accept. Finally, realizing that Walt was a controlling person, Sherry took the blame upon herself. I'd be that way too if I had a basket case like me to live with, she'd think. I'm the reason he gets so critical and frustrated. These conclusions led Sherry to a solution she had practiced for years: loving Walt out of his anger. It was a strategy that went something like this. First, Sherry learned to read Walt's emotions by watching his temper, body language, and tone of voice. She became exquisitely aware of his moods and especially sensitive to things that would set him off: lateness, disagreements, and her own anger. As long as she was quiet and agreeable, things went well, but let her preferences raise their ugly heads and she risked getting her head lopped off. Sherry learned to read Walt well and quickly. After sensing that she was crossing an emotional line, she would employ stage 2 of loving Walt. She did an immediate backtrack, coming around to his viewpoint, but not really. Quietly holding her tongue or even apologizing for being hard to live with all helped. Stage 3 of loving Walt was doing special things for him to show that she was sincere. This might mean dressing more attractively or making his favorite meals. Didn't the Bible talk about being this kind of wife? The 3 steps of loving Walt worked for a time, but the peace never lasted. The problem with loving Walt out of his anger was that Sherry was dead tired of trying to soothe Walt out of his tantrums. Thus, he stayed angry longer, and his anger isolated her more from him. Her love for her husband was eroding. She had felt that no matter how bad things were, God had joined them, and their love would get them through. But in the past few years, it was more commitment than love. When she was honest, she admitted that many times she could feel nothing at all towards Walt but resentment and fear. And that's what tonight was all about. These things needed to change. Somehow they needed to rekindle the flames of their first love. Sherry walked into the family room. The late night talk show host on the television screen had just finished his monologue. "Honey, can we talk?" she asked tentatively. There was no answer. Moving closer, she saw why. Walt had fallen asleep on the couch, thinking about waking him up. She remembered his stinging words the last time she'd been so insensitive. She turned off the television and the lights and walked into the empty bedroom.